Welcome to Succession Stories, the podcast where we explore the personal journeys, pivotal decisions, and lessons learned behind business transition. Today, I'm joined by an exit planning coach and former business owner who has experienced the highs and lows of business ownership firsthand. After successfully exiting 3 businesses, he learned some hard-earned lessons about owner dependency, risk management, and what it really takes to build a business that's ready for transition. And one of those exits took an unexpected turn just before the pandemic, totally reshaped his perspective, and ultimately led him into the world of exit planning and coaching. So whether you're a business owner thinking about your future, an advisor serving entrepreneurs, or simply someone who enjoys stories of resilience and reinvention, you will find valuable insights in today's episode. Alan Bennett, welcome to Succession Stories, the owner of Trust Built Solutions.
Thank you, Laurie. You make me sound like a superhero.
Well, there's one thing I said in the intro, which I know we're going to spend some time on, which is, hey, you've got some businesses that you led. You've got an exit journey. All 3 businesses had very different outcomes. And I thought we could talk about those, that exit journey that you had and what lessons learned you've had. But I want us to talk about all 3 because they're very different. So why don't we start with the first one? What was the first business? Tell me about it.
It was a retail meat market, and I'm in Little Rock, Arkansas. And I think I speak on behalf of all passionate craftsmen, business owners that are out there. I found a need in Little Rock, and specifically the area of Little Rock that I lived in. You couldn't find a good steak, and after years and years of being frustrated, somebody dared me, like, I'm just going to go do it myself. And it's like, you go do that, Alan. So I did. I found that I was in corporate America for 10 years prior to that. And I thought that, corporate America wasn't for me. I had a severe passion for something. I identified a need, and I just grabbed the old bootstraps, if you will, and did it. And it was retail. It was meat market only, or it was meat market retail only that ultimately evolved into a catering business. So it was a combination of meat market and retail. So the lease that I had was an 8-year lease. And in the 8 years, after year 3, the catering sales had surpassed the retail side. So I'd kind of backed into catering. We in the meat market, think of like a Whole Foods or Fresh Market in about 4,000 square foot space. That's pretty much what I had. It was just a mini me version of something like that. I flown in seafood. We made casseroles and gourmet salads and things like that. So not only was it a meat market, it was like a little miniature grocery store. People would come in and ask for, hey, I really like your lasagna. I've got 30 people coming over. Can you make me a big pan for 30 people? Right. And so that's how we backdoored our way, or organically got into the catering. And eventually, within a few years, we're doing weddings and things like that. So the catering sales had surpassed the retail side.
What was the business roughly in revenue? Roughly.
We were a little over 2 million at the time. That was probably I don't want to say it was our highest, but when we were the combination of those two, right up to 2008, 2.3, I think, if I remember right. I used to know that number exact, but it was a little over 2.3, 2.4, somewhere around.
Did it feel like a lifestyle business? Was this, you said you left corporate America. Was this a business that you were thinking that you would run and be happy in the retail space or catering space?
Yeah, so there's several things that had happened there. When I opened the business, it was my wife and I, and we didn't have children at the time, and we were young. Let's say I was maybe 30 years old, I think, when I opened that first business up, and no kids. She had just finished medical school, and we're both working 80, 90-hour work weeks, and we didn't have kids. We just worked. And that's all we did. And it was okay because we were both we had that little proverbial match, and we're going to set the whole world on fire. And we had this passion for what we were doing, and everything was new, and it was like a honeymoon all over again, except in business. And we realized that we were both exhausted. Things needed to change. And, the way we handled the business, or way I handled, she had her own thing going on with medicine. But what I did was, I was so passionate about it. I was blinded by the lack of systems and processes. And it was all about push through. The way I was brought up is you just work hard. If you want to launch your own business, you get out there and you make it happen. And you don't think about how to make it happen. It's just make it happen. And I never thought about trying to figure out a better way until it got painful. The pain was in the hours that it consumed. That was the pain.
So you were working, you said 80 to 90 hours a week?
Well, at one point it was 100.
Oh my
It
goodness.
was 100 hours a week until I closed. That was 7 days a week. So I was open 7 to 7, 7 days a week. I had to keep it simple, but it was
7 to 7, 7 days a week. So is it fair to say that you were burned out? I mean, it's
Oh my
terrible
God.
given
I was
the kitchen pun here.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, a physical numb feeling. There was, sometimes I'm not here, but sometimes I'd get emotional just talking about it. I've outgrown that because it's so many years ago. It was 18, I guess, so years ago. But it was, my feet were numb. And the thing that bothered me the most was the mental numbness. Yeah, that was the hardest part, and knowing that something had to change.
What did you decide had to change? Did you think you could hire somebody else to run it?
Well, I did have some people like that, and I'd hired some consultants, and the consultants at that time weren't cheap. The company, and I don't even know if they're still around, International Profit Associates. I still remember that because I wrote a $30,000 check to them to come in and try to help. And they identified a lot of stuff that needed to be identified. They made it real obvious. They didn't show me how to use the information that they shared. They just give me, at that time, it was a 3-ring binder. They didn't even have disk or, USBs. That wasn't a thing back then. It was a 3-ring binder, and everything was in paper. Now they did convert it over to a Word document and Excel, but it was a 3-ring physical binder. And they said, here you go. And if you need anything else, it's $15,000 a week. And I couldn't afford that. It was crazy expensive. So I was given a map, but I didn't know how to read the map. Right. And so for me, the only thing I knew how to relieve that pain was to close 1 day a week, which wasn't a bad idea, but that's how I reduced my hours off of a 100-hour work week, because I just closed a day and I slept. That was a lot of it. I still didn't know how to read the map. And so then the catering started. The catering was more profitable, and it didn't take me long to figure out that that was a better path for me. And it wasn't because I didn't want to do the retail. It was, I can make more money and work less. So I need to do more of that. Still didn't have the systems and processes in place. The pivotal moment there, when I was transitioning from the retail to the catering, was, do I re-sign the lease or not? And the reason I didn't re-sign the lease was that was in 2008. There was a financial crisis going on. And a lot of our business was pharmaceutical reps. They would come in and buy lunches for doctors and things like that. We did other catering, but that was by far the industry that I relied on for most of those catering dollars. And that was going away quickly. And my landlord wanted me to sign a 10-year lease. What I didn't know at the time was they had a bird in the hand. I didn't know. They had somebody willing to sign a 10-year lease. And so they cranked up another 3% per year, and they required a minimum of a 10-year lease in order for me to stay in that place. And I didn't know, at that time, if you remember, they were saying, we don't know if this is going to be a depression or not. It was that bad. And, we were talking about having, we did have kids at that point. I had a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. and a wife who had just finished up residency and barely out into practice. And the way I looked at it is they were asking me to sign a $650,000 note. That's what it was in my mind. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. I can't do that. So I closed the business. The easiest thing to do was to close the business. There was some profit there. And if I'd known more about it, and if I'd have planned ahead of time and given myself more of a runway, I might have been able to sell that business. But I was at the end of the road. I was out of gas. The light was on. It was on E. The fuel light was on. Just to use an analogy, but I was like, well, I don't have a choice now.
Well, you were just existing, you were surviving. That
Yeah,
was not a thriving situation at all. Then with the lease it'd be very risky for you to sign up for a 10-year lease. So they did have you in a bit of a squeeze there.
yeah,
And the decision to close, I'm sure wasn't an easy one, but it probably at the time was really the only thing that you felt like you could do.
yeah. And I'll tell you, thinking back on that situation, the way I felt was the landlord, put me in a vice. But in hindsight and knowing what I know now, is I put myself in that position. Landlord didn't do that to me. I did it to myself because of a lack of preparation, a lack of knowledge, a lack of understanding of how to navigate and get in front of it. Yeah, that was my constraint.
So tell me about after you closed it, were you angry? Were you upset or sad?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to go with anger, and not at anyone other than myself. It was like, how did I not see this? I mean, I hired consultants and I paid at that time, $30,000, and I should have learned this lesson. And what did I not see? So it was more of me not finding the resources to help me navigate through this. And so I didn't reach back out to those consultants because they still didn't show me how to read the map, so to speak. I found another consultant for another $30,000 that said, "Yeah, we can take all this and show you how to do it." And all they did was, well, I say all they did help me see around the owner dependency part. They didn't call it that. That was not the jargon that was used back then. They just said leadership development. We're going to show you how to develop your leaders. And they did that, not effectively, but they helped me see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I still had to find my way down it, but that was where I gained insight as to, okay, it's not me that needs to be working hard. I need to figure out how to get them to do the work.
So how much time went by before you said to yourself you were ready for your next venture?
Probably 4 years. I want to say it was 2012 at that point. That's probably about 4 years. At that point, I decided to do contract catering. In the contract that we did, and this is the whole blind, what is it, the blind luck or whatever, the blind hog or blind squirrel finds a nut type thing. A friend of mine, his kids went to a private school here in Little Rock, and the food service program that they had was, in his opinion, was terrible. And he said, "Hey, I'm on the school board, and we need to figure out how to do another food service program. Do you mind coming to the meeting and advising us on how to find a good food service supplier?" All right, to do that. He's a friend of mine. I thought, yeah, I'll do a favor for him. Well, it was dirty pool. That was not the ploy. The ploy was to get me down there and convince me to take over their food service program. So I was duped into this, and I thought, okay, all right, you got me. It was a church school, and it was a church that I'm a part of. So I'm like, okay, there's a little bit more deeper connection. I'll help you guys out for 1 year, but this is not my thing. And I did it long enough to where I'm like, you know what? If I had about four of these, this might be some money. I might could do this and have less time. So I ended up at that, by the end of the next year, I had 5 different private schools that we were contracted to do the food service program. And that's when the pivotal moment was on how to run a contract catering business. And if the schools are in session, we work, and the schools are out of session, we don't work. And after getting 5 schools, I got up to 7 schools, and then all the employees that I had for those 5 schools wanted to work in the summertime. So then I started going after summer camps. So I would have some other work that we would do in the summertime to keep some of the employees busy year round. And that's how
It was a different nature of the business versus the first one. Here you have contracts. Maybe it's not 12 months of the year with the same client, but you had more predictable revenue cash flow. Is that right?
right. I had recurring revenue. I didn't call it that. I didn't know what that was, but that's what it was. I had contracts. I had recurring revenue. I had something unique. I had a way so I actually generated revenue for those schools. So most of the private schools at that time, and I don't know if they're still doing it that way now, but the food service program is in the red, and I found a way to get them in the black. And so what I would do is, for the contract, I gave them 10 cents for every meal. So their food service program, instead of being a cost center, it became a profit center. Not much of one, but it put them in the black. It became an asset. And that's how I ended up holding those long-term contracts.
Smart. So you grew that business. How big was it at its peak?
Back up to about 2. It wasn't quite as big as at 2.5, but it was flirting around the $2 million range. I think the biggest we got was like 2.1, 1.8. It evolved a little bit. Some schools would have us do some of their private stuff, and then sometimes they would do, another catering company might come in and do their annual whatever, so it fluctuated, even though the meals were consistent, the school meals were consistent. The extra catering that came from and around the schools, that would fluctuate. So that's why the numbers would change.
So if I put my M&A valuation hat on, we could have a very interesting comparison, company A versus company B. Quite simply, right? Same revenue, same owner even,
Yeah.
but very different nature of the cash flow. And so if we were going to stack up the two and say which one had a higher valuation, of course it would be the second one. At what point did you decide that you were ready to transition that business?
All right. You want the honest answer?
Of course, you're talking to me. No one's listening. Just tell me
Yeah.
give me the skinny here. It's just us.
It's around, I want to say it was somewhere between 2012 and 2015. I think it was 2015, somewhere closer to 2015. I had developed my team to where my chef was running most of everything. And so I had now gone from originally working 100 hours a week to where I was working somewhere between 25 and 30 hours a week. And I was wearing shorts and flip-flops to the office. I wasn't working in a kitchen. I didn't turn on a fryer. I didn't touch a knife. I didn't have to do anything. And I had this, $2 million catering business, and I never lifted a finger. I opened a laptop up and I'd go around slapping backs and saying thank you. And I was all about connection. I was all about compassion. I was all about building culture. That was my world. And I could do it in flip-flops. It was awesome.
That's ideal. You walk around saying, sounds great, thanks.
It
Every owner wants that, right?
But the honest truth was I had so much free time, I was buying toys. And my wife's like, wait a minute, we have kids, and we're not doing this. And I thought, I need to find something else that I need to do. And in end of 2018, the beginning of 2019, I went to my chef and I said, hey, you be interested in buying this business, because I need to find something to do. I was getting a little bit bored. Even though I had a job that was working 25 to 30 hours a week, I was bored. I wanted another challenge, and he wanted the business. He was a single dad, had a 9-year-old daughter that lived with him, and he's like, yeah, I could do this, and it would give him more income than what he's got, and he'd have this revenue coming in. All of our contracts were between 3 and 5 year contracts, and at that time, the deal closed in December of 19. And at that time, the shortest contract, I think, had about 2 years on it. That was a short one. And that was December of 19. And we had 7 schools and 2 summer camps that we were contracted with. And I knew what the income was. At that time, the SBA lending wasn't as open as it is now. The way the SBA lending is now, we would have gone through an SBA process. He would have most likely been approved, and we'd have agreed on whatever the deal structure would have been, and I would have been mostly paid for everything, at least half up front. The way SBA was then, he couldn't get a loan. He couldn't get commercial loan through conventional lending. He couldn't get an SBA, and so we did seller finance.
So he couldn't get a loan because he was required for collateral and he didn't have the collateral?
Correct.
Okay. So this is sort of a, just interesting for people if they haven't gone down this process. He probably had to show his own personal net worth statement.
Yeah.
They were looking for him to put a percentage down. You said what percent? You said half. They were asking to put down half.
Yeah. At that time, the commercial lenders were asking for half, and he didn't have $10,000 to put down.
Right. Right. Yeah. Today's environment would be pretty different. I agree with you, but you were talking about 2019. So you developed a seller financing. Mm-hmm. How many years of the loan?
It was going to be 10 years.
10 years. Okay. 10. So everybody's listening now thinking, 2019. Okay. So now we're up at the top of the roller coaster here. Then what happened?
COVID happened, and he made 4 payments, and he made them on time. So he knew the book. He was running the books, and so we knew exactly what he could pay, and we worked out a deal. It wasn't what I probably could have done if I'd have gone a strategic sale or if I'd have looked for a buyer outside of him. But what we agreed upon, I was happy with. He was ecstatic, but it was an amount that I'm like, you know what, this is enough to where I can take this and have some time to find out what is plan B for Alan. It was going to buy me some time to figure that out. And to take a sidestep, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to do something. So I didn't have a plan like I should have, but the plan was to find the next thing. And I had enough money and enough time to figure that out. I was going to figure out afterwards. Okay. So meanwhile, back at the ranch, what we decided to do was come up with an amount we both could live with. He made 4 payments, which got him to April. And in March is when everything shut down. And he could make the April payment because of the revenue that came in March. March was only half a month. March the 12th was the last day that they served a meal at any schools. All the schools were shut down. None of the camps had kids coming back in. And in the fall, when the schools did come back in, these are all private schools. So they didn't have to follow the public school rules around they did follow child nutrition. So they did do that. But what they didn't have to do is they didn't have to even open the kitchen. They could just tell the kids, you're brown bagging. You can order pizza in. You can take, they found a way to feed the kids. And so he had to have income. And he went back home to Colorado. So he's like, I got to go find a job. And he was out of a business and I was out of a business. I was out, but I got 4 months. That was it.
Wow. That's devastating. I mean, that's a massive blow, obviously, to both of you.
Yeah. I got to sell the assets. That was the deal. Even though he owned the business, it was seller finance. So once the deal structure was void, I guess, then all the assets, the hard assets, fell back to me, and I was able to liquidate that.
But it's still pennies on the dollar.
Oh yeah. Food service equipment is almost worthless. Yeah.
Right. Especially during COVID.
Especially during COVID.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
And do you recall from the purchase agreement what the terms were? I mean, was there anything that could have, this was I think in the language of contracts, we call it force majeure, right? Which
Yeah.
is sort of like an act of God. There's nothing that we could have seen, could have been an earthquake, right? It sort of falls in that category that would have caused the closure of the business. But is there anything else that now, as you look back, you say, well, what if we did this or what if we did that?
There's some insurance policies that are available now. I don't know if they were available then. We did not explore that. So there's several things that woulda, shoulda, coulda, Captain Hindsight stepping in, that we should have done, and I found out that we could have done. One of them is there is an insurance policy that is available for things like that. There are some different types of extensions that where he could have gotten a loan based on those. There's several things that could have happened, but once it's happened, you had to set the deal up before you signed the agreement. It all had to be part of the deal structure. The language wasn't in there. All the language that we needed, every time we went to a lawyer, or I went to a lawyer, or he went to a lawyer, and we were not trying to sue each other. We were just trying to look for clarity on how to best get out of this deal the best way. He didn't want me to sue him. I had one lawyer that was saying, go after him. I'm like, well, he's got nothing. He's a single dad with a 9-year-old girl. I mean, what am I doing? And the guy was with me for 14 years. So it was tough. I mean, it was emotional on both of us trying to figure this whole thing out. And the easiest, fastest way was just, let's liquidate what we can, lick our wounds and move on. And I was, I guess the word is distraught over the whole thing. And here I found myself again going, I thought what did I didn't learn from the first time that I had to close a business down. And so that's when, that was a pivotal moment for me to really dig into understanding how to run a business and structure it up the right way and build a secure business. Not just, do you know your thing, right? Can you make money doing your thing? That is a small part of being successful at business. And I found it out the hard way.
You sure did. Those two were lessons in the hard knocks, school of hard
Yeah.
knocks. And as they say, I guess third time's a charm. So tell me about the third business. How did you, or did your wife think you were crazy? Like, hey, I want to create the third thing. And she thought you were insane, but said, okay.
Well, did I mention my wife's a psychiatrist? So
Oh,
we use the word
sorry. She wouldn't have
crazy.
called you insane.
It's relative here.
Disturbed.
Yeah. So the third exit was hers. So that was the third one. And what had happened is she was approached by private equity. And at the time, when she started with that practice, there was only 3 of them, and they'd gotten up to 7 psychiatrists in their practice. And in that exit, that is where I got to use all my cool tools on how do we do things right and make it attractive and get that higher end of that multiple. And that structure was quite a bit different, a lot more complex. And for her, it was a second job. So even though we had a little bit better control over how the process worked and there was a whole lot more insight, there still was a tremendous amount of work that had to be done in order to get that thing set up the right way. You could have taken the easy route and taken a lower multiple, and maybe the earn out would have been a lot less. But to get it done right, there is a tremendous amount of hours that are going to have to take place going back. And you've got employee laws that you have to look at. There are accounting. There's so much that goes into it, especially when you're talking about a medical practice and electrical medical records and HIPAA, and there's so much going on, and the different insurances that are handled in those transactions. It's all very delicate, and structuring and getting in front of all that is what's critical.
Absolutely. I want to go back to something we talked about in your first business, which is owner dependency.
Mm-hmm.
And I know the words weren't necessarily used by the consultants, today we do flag owner dependency and call a spade, right? We, as owners, need to look in the mirror and see that we are holding our business back, or if we're not happy, we control that. Nobody else does. And so, are we overworked? Is our health, we're not as quite as healthy as we need to be? Our relationships not healthy? So if we're seeing some of these red flags, we're so dependent on our business, and vice versa, our business is dependent on us, right? It's like this weird codependency. We need to do something about it, right? You express some of those things, not all of them, but some of them. It's also a value killer, right? It makes the business less attractive, less transferable. What are some of the other warning signs that you might point out to a business owner who's in the midst of that murky water to say, hey, you need that life preserver, my friend?
Yeah, I'll answer that by telling a story. And the story that I've got, this happened in 2002. This is when I was still working 100 hours a week. And I'll be brief with it. It's actually a long story, but I'll be brief with it. And what happened is there was sometime in '01, somebody threw a rock through the front windshield, went in and stole a safe, and stole a bunch of meat, stuff like that. And after that, we got everything fixed. Of course, insurance helped out. I installed some security cameras. And one night, I was so passionate about getting it done right and having the perfect steak that I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I went back in there and I was measuring the steaks because I want them 1.25 inches. I want every ribeye, I want every strip, every porterhouse, all these 1.25 inches. They all had, and I went in there with a tape measure and I was measuring steaks. And my manager and one of the assistant managers saw me on the video measuring measuring the steaks with the tape measure. And that moment is that's when they lost trust in me. So my business is Trust Built Solutions, and what I found is there's a negative trust cycle that goes on. It's not whether the owner trusts the people, it's whether the people trust the owner. And that's when they lost trust in me. And that's when things changed for me, when they had a meeting with me. Like, why don't you trust us? To me, and this is what my whole business is built around, is owner dependency. If you can owner dependency can be solved with trust, but the owner has to trust their team, and you have to share that. You have to be the one that falls on the sword. You have to be vulnerable and show them that you trust them. Once they see that, then that's when it starts to reciprocate. And that's when delegation starts to stick. That's when tasks get done. That's when people understand purpose and accountability. But you have to have them know that you trust them. Then they'll trust you. Then you can go to purpose. Then you can go to accountability. And so that is where my hard lesson was around owner dependency.
Is it possible that the trust can't be repaired?
Oh, no, you can absolutely repair it. You absolutely can. And here's the thing. There's two key things that I look at around trust. One, it needs to be repaired in the same manner that it was broken. So just because you are compassionate with your people, if the trust was broken through character, right? You've made some bad decisions, but you're very nice to everybody. That you have to heal it the same way that it was broken, and you have to do it with consistency. So if it's poor character choices that has broken the trust, then you have to be consistent with building good character decisions going forward, and they have to see that. So it's the way it was broken and consistently done over a period of time in order for trust to be built back. And it'll become stronger. The way I look at it is like a broken bone. Sometimes a broken bone, where it's broken, becomes a stronger piece of the bone.
Yeah, it's a painful story.
Yeah.
It's a painful story, but I'm glad you shared it, because I think a lot of people probably have encountered something like that. I just heard a story today, confidentially, from a client situation. I can't reveal too much about it, but it hit home in what you're saying. I think the owner is involved in the day-to-day aspects of the business that he really doesn't need to be in, like really detailed stuff. And it's signaling to the team he doesn't trust them.
Yeah. The other part of trust and owner dependency that I see is people are wired a certain way. And I like to use my wife and I as an example. So she is a data first person, relationship second. I'm relationship first, data second. And when you have two people in a relationship, so I'm not talking about a husband and wife relationship, but in a working relationship, if you've got two people that are forced to work together in whatever capacity that is, it could be sales and accounting, or it could be two people within a meat department. Everybody's wired to receive information a certain way. And communication takes place on the listener's terms. So the person that's receiving the information, there's a certain wiring as to how they operate. And if they're wired for data and facts and things like that, they don't want you coming in smooth talking. That doesn't work. And they close down. They shut their ears, and they're not receptive to that type of dialogue. So what happens in owner dependency, if you've got an owner who is, let's say, has a high sense of urgency, drive, let's get this thing done and get it done right and done right now, and the person receiving the information, the one that they're trying to get to do something, is not wired in that way, they shut down, they draw back. And what happens is the owner is constantly bridging the gap. So if you've got two people that are wired differently, aren't getting along, they don't know how to communicate with each other, the owner steps in and bridges that gap. And every time you do that, you're teaching not only those two, but everybody else in the team that witnesses it that Alan's going to fix this. He's going to step in and fix this. He always does. And it's a trap. And that's the trap that owner dependency usually gets caught in, is bridging the gap somehow, whether it's systems, processes, or relationships. They're always stepping in and solving that problem because they have to. They're the owner. That's the way they look at it.
It is a trap, though. It's hard because you get caught in the trap of needing to be the solver because of that feeling, like you said, you're the owner, and you have to. It all responsibility falls on your shoulders, and it's a bit of a catch-22, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it's owners, the way they look at it, and I was the same way. They've leveraged their house or some asset, and they're like, the bank is going to come knocking if I don't make this happen. So they feel like, and a lot of them will wear it as a badge of honor. I know I did. And if you're constantly bridging that gap, and some people think it's a sense of duty. I had a third generation electrical contractor as a client, and he constantly was like, my granddaddy did it this way, my daddy did it this way, and I have to do, I'm like, and breaking that cycle is hard because you've got two people that you see as, idols and mentors not doing it the right way. It's hard to look at any other way. So it's not, I'm not saying it's brainwashing, but that's it's the mindset and openness to new methods in order to do it. And a lot of times the saying I always say is it's hard to read the label from inside the bottle. So that outside perspective to help the business owner understand what's really going on it takes an outside perspective.
Yeah, it definitely does. It definitely does. Alan, we've covered a lot of ground tonight. We talked about your background, your journey with your businesses, and some things you've learned along the way. Let's summarize. Let's recap here. What are some of the key takeaways for our business owners who are thinking about one day maybe selling their business and need to prepare it? How far in advance? Should we be doing to prepare? What are some of your key takeaways?
Well, they say the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time to do it is today. And running a business is the same way. It's never too late to start, and that's the good news. The better news is the faster you get going with it, the better it's going to be. So planning, just because you do exit planning doesn't mean you got to sell. It doesn't mean that, there's so many. I run into, and I'm sure you do too, run into a lot of business owners that, whoa, it's like talking about depression. Whoa, wait a minute. I'm not selling it. No, nobody said I'm selling my business, right? And especially the ones in the trades, they're spooky about it. And it's, to me, it is every exit plan done effectively sets them up to where they can grow the business. It's easier to get loans. It's easier to open a second location. Once you set it up, you have so much more control. You can play both offense and defense. So to me, I don't mean to ramble, but it's the planning. It's an exit plan. It's not an exit do. It's an exit plan. And that's and I find that depending on the style of the person, it's hard for them to plan. So the business owners that I see that are the ready, fire, aim people, those are the harder ones to grasp this concept, right? And it's understanding that you can create a system and a process that makes it easier next year or the next or the next or in 10 years or whatever. And I found out the hard way, if you don't get ahead of this thing, even if you're lucky enough to sell the business, chances are it could still be catastrophic. Because I found that out. I found out what happens if you don't, you would close. And if you don't do it right, you're disappointed. That's the one thing that I would say would be the takeaway.
It's funny, a lot of times in this industry, we talk about exit regrets, the things you regret 1 year after a sale. And a lot of times I describe it as we regret the decisions that we made or things that we did. We can also have regret for things that we didn't do. And I think what you and I are basically saying to you, the business owner listening to the show, is that when time is on your side, you have more options to make change, and don't let yourself try to do some exit planning when you're exiting, because it's just too late. I think that's a good summary from today. What do you think, Alan?
I think that's fantastic. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, if people want to get in touch with you, what's a good way to find you online?
Well, I'm all over LinkedIn. I'm not a social media person, but I'm pretty eat up with LinkedIn. So you'll see me chatting around there. I've got a website, trustbuiltsolutions.com. And then my email is Alan, which is ALAN, at trustbuiltsolutions.com. Those are probably the easiest ways to find me.
Awesome. And we'll have those in the show notes. And I love it when we have guests on the show who can talk from their own experiences. And obviously we share a lot of the same ethos of how business owners can impact their future. So thank you so much for coming on the show and being vulnerable and sharing your experience, Alan, and things that you didn't exactly go the way you would have hoped. But I think those stories are really important to share, because we all do learn from them. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Laurie.
Absolutely. So to all our listeners, thank you for joining us today. You can find all of our episodes and more on our YouTube channel. Be sure to love and follow Succession Stories in your favorite podcast player. And we'll see you next time on Succession Stories. Thanks for joining us on Succession Stories. Before we wrap, is your business truly ready, and are you? If you're not sure, that's exactly why I created the Succession Readiness Assessment based on the BUILT method. In just a few minutes, you'll get a clear snapshot of where you stand and what might be holding you back. You'll find the link to the assessment in the show notes, btsherpa.com/succession.